Are we recording?
I'm not exactly sure where to look. I'm looking in the upper right. Oh, yes, it's the upper left-hand corner, and we are recording.
Excellent. Here we are on The Blind Man in Black, and I'm here with Gene Landreth, storyteller, writer, um, a musician, so many things. I'm so excited to have you here, Gene. Uh, the main reason I really wanted to talk with you is because this podcast is the themes are loving beyond one's fears, humor, um, and being the change that that you wish to be in the world, and just general like conviviality. And you create so much conviviality and joy around everyone that you encounter. Like my wife loves you. She says that she has not had many times to have contact with you, but she really loves being around you, and I do too. I mean, when we were working together at the Independent Living Center in Northern California, every interaction, it was just your sense of humor, your joy, and everything is mesmerizing, it's an honor to have you here.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Brian.
Yeah, well, let's start from the beginning. Let's go back to way back to Alabama, so where it all began. So tell us about how life shaped you.
Well, I can tell you this, and also we probably ought to uh, point out that I speak Southern. So I was born and raised in Alabama, and sometimes it sounds like a foreign language. But I will tell you, I was not only raised in the heart of the Bible Belt, I had a mother who was devoutly Christian, and that tended to dominate life in my household growing up. Um, and as I think anybody who begins to become of age, uh, that created major conflict for me personally. The conflict of being wanting to be not only pleasing my mother, but to to be the religious person of faith that I felt that I should be, and coming of age. And sometimes that's not handled well. My mother later in life said she did not handle it well, and I think that conflict defined my life from the time that I was old enough to think for myself. And so that's mainly what I talk about in the early chapters of the book.
Could you
Um,
tell our listeners and viewers the name of the book?
it's called Diagnosis Screwed Up. And it basically is indicating, I had therapy early on because of my parents felt like that what I was going through might be some type of psychological issue, as many devout Christians feel when a child begins to go a little bit off the rails of what they feel like they should be. And so I had therapy, and the doctor didn't come right out and say it, but he basically said, uh, "You have issues." And they stem from that. And basically, the suggestion was you have to become who you are. Now, I never lost my faith. I'm still a person of faith. Um, but I did go through the coming of age, as every young man will go through. Um, and I think the fact that I felt like everything that I did discovering my sexual identity uh, was in conflict with my religious beliefs, the way that I was brought up, and that caused me great psychological issues that I felt carried with me quite a few years till I finally decided, um, no, that part of growing up that maybe was mishandled and wasn't necessarily screwed up, but it felt that way, and some people felt that way.
Well, let's go back a little further. I remember one of the early chapters discussing you have a brother,
Yes.
and they had a very special way of differentiating you and your brother. Could you discuss that?
Yes, and this probably was brought up in therapy as well. I was a I was a mama's boy. Uh, my brother and I were, I guess you would say, unexpected and unplanned. Um, and so my two older sisters were both girls, and that's what my mama knew how to do. And she felt like she did not know how to raise a boy. And so basically, uh, my brother was influenced by my father, and he became very, I guess, boy oriented. And though I was every bit a boy, um, I was basically raised by my mother. I don't think I had my first haircut till I was 3. And then my mama did not like it then. I think I wore little dresses for the first year and a half. And she basically raised me as her third girl. And
You kind of your audio got a little bit of distorted. I just want to clarify this point. So your mother made you wear dresses,
I,
correct?
I, I don't know if she made me. She dressed me. I
Okay.
think at that point, um, yeah, she raised me as her third daughter. That's
Okay.
basically what she did until my father finally put his foot down about it, and I was probably 3 years old when that happened. And I think he took me to the barber shop without my mother knowing it, and had my hair cut. And so
Did
I
he give
think
you a flat top?
he gave me a buzz cut, yes, and I think in those days it was called a crew cut, and I
Right.
got one of those. But I think if you could see pictures of me when I was 2 years old, I looked like Shirley Temple. I had long ringlets and a little dress, and so yeah, that influenced me. And
Did you
even
ever
on up,
sing the lollipop song? Was that ever requested?
no, I don't know that I became Shirley Temple, but I think in comparison, a lot of people have compared me, those early pictures, to Shirley Temple. Even after my father began to have a little more influence on me, I was basically gravitated to my mother and her influence on up until I actually graduated high school and went to college. Um,
Now
uh,
let's hold on one second. So, how did you when you were older, when you were in, let's say, junior high, high school, did you remember that she was dressing you that way, and how did you react to it? Were you like, "What are you doing?"
no, no, and I'm going to be honest with you. When I went to college and realized how um, far off the average teenage boy was, because I was 17 when I went to college. Uh, I was made fun of. It did not take long for the other guys in the dorm to realize this guy knows nothing about life, uh, nothing about the opposite sex, nothing about sex in general. I then became a little bit upset with my mother uh, and my father, but primarily my mother, who never ever felt like it was necessary to sit me down and talk to me about these things. And as a matter of fact, I think they've all assumed that either my friends in high school will have filled me in, or at least my brother. You know, I had a twin brother who I think was very educated on the matter. He had girlfriends. He dated. I did not have girlfriends. I had one date my whole high school, and that went south pretty quickly. And so I never dated again. So I never had dates. Uh,
So why did that go south?
uh, because I wanted to be normal. And we talk about this in the book. If you recall, I decided I had practiced kissing on my pillow for months, preparing for my date and my first real kiss.
Right.
And I did not know how to kiss, and it was so bad that I was laughed at on the spot. I was laughed at there. In fact, I still know all of the people that were there and were in the car, and they still laugh about it to this day. Um, so I guess I just wanted to be normal, and did a very poor job of it. So
Now,
that's why
did you grow up in a middle class household, or what was that situation like?
Very, very, very middle class, solidly middle class. I never wanted for anything my whole life. We were always dressed. Now, early on, my brother and I shared everything. For Christmas, if we got a bicycle, we got one bicycle that we shared. We started playing the accordion probably when I was 11 or 12 years old. As did my brother, and we got one accordion that we shared. So when we practiced or when we went to classes, we would have to share back and forth. So there was a sharing aspect to that. But as far as wanting for anything, ever going hungry, ever going unclothed, always lived in a nice home. Actually, my father built the home, and I was born and raised in it. Until a hurricane destroyed it 6 or 7 years ago in Alabama. It was still my boyhood home. I never lived anywhere else but there. But we never wanted for anything. However, church was the center of our life. We went to church probably 4 or 5 days a week for some purpose or another, and all day Sunday. I think probably Saturday and maybe one other day of the week was the only day that we did not have some kind of church function. And so that dominated my life early on. And actually, when you look at it, that is not something that will lend itself to being educated about life once you leave that scenario. And so when I went to college, and I'm telling you, even though it was a ministerial college, I went to ministerial college.
Mm-hmm.
Even then, even amongst those, I was an outcast because of my lack of knowledge about life in general. So I am, again, a person of faith to this day, but I raised my daughters and my children much differently because of that. I gave them a little bit more free will. We educated them. Of course, now you got to remember, in those days, there was no Google, there was no PCs, there was nothing except what you might hear in the locker rooms or on the street or at church or whatnot. And so, but now, obviously, and when I raised my kids, there was more materials available to them to where it would be hard to go to college now, no matter how you were raised, without being pretty well educated on things. Just wasn't the case when I went.
Right. By the way, did I say your name when we started this?
I am
hope
not
I did.
sure.
I'm going to say, just if anybody is confused, this is Gene Landreth, storyteller, author, musician, man of faith. Just as a reminder, I apologize if I did not do a proper introduction. But
yeah, I believe you did, but thanks for repeating it. That's good.
So, I mean, let me ask you this: were there times in your life where you question your faith? Because I'll tell you this, I feel like I feel like I'm a deeply religious person without a religion. And I feel like I would have been, I would have done well as a preacher. However, I couldn't commit to a religion. I practiced Buddhism. I even had a moment in 2013 when I came back from Mexico. And I remember walking through the woods, and I was dealing with the loss of my eyesight and my hearing. And I said, I just spoke to whoever was listening. I said, if there's a God, please show yourself in a way that I can understand. Talk to me as you've talked to so many prophets. Talk to me so that I can hear you, not through metaphor, not through symbolism, but just talk to me. So, and it's just so I understand that you're there. And I didn't hear anything, and nothing happened. So I'm just curious, did you ever have like a moment where your faith was disrupted or shaken or?
Throughout beginning in college, I felt like, what is this all about? And I discussed that. I think I worked my way through that. And as I say, weaseled my way into the backseat of spirituality again. But I did question a little bit then. But primarily when I questioned it the most, I had a stroke in 2005. I was very active, traveled all over the country, and all of a sudden I had a stroke. I was in the hospital. I was admitted in the hospital the day my father died, and so I was not able to go to the funeral. And over the 3 days while they were trying to diagnose what was going on, I went from having a minor stroke to having a massive stroke. And so from that point, I did question it. I was very upset about it. I don't know that I was upset with God, but I questioned why God would do that to me. In 2000, but you didn't know me before 2013, but between the time of 2005 to 2013, I went through a lot of therapy and was able to walk and was able to get around a little bit. Again, traveled all over the country in an accessible van, all by myself. I traveled thousands and thousands of miles, literally from one end of the country to the other, and was able to walk some with a cane, though I fell down a lot. But I was able to, walk 40 or 50 yards, and I felt a little bit normal. In 2013, I had another stroke, which pretty well did me in, and I've not been able to walk, not take steps. Again, I began to question. But if you ever followed any of the songs that I've written, and I've written thousands of gospel, not thousands, hundreds, several hundred gospel songs over the years, you will notice those right around at that time were me basically coming back to the fact that even though my life had changed, I was so lucky, and whatever it could have been worse. You and I both know people who've had strokes who cannot communicate anymore, cannot get around in any way, and I did not lose my ability to think or to converse or to connect with other people.
And you haven't lost your sense of humor. That's for damn sure.
Well, I don't know that I'm sounding funny today because of the topic, but I can tell you, if I told the stories of when I did learn about sex, I think you would laugh. Those were hilarious.
Let's hear it.
Oh, well, that gets pretty, I don't know if your podcast is R-rated, but
anything goes on this podcast. So we talk about polyamory, we talk about sex, drugs, rock and roll. So please feel free to share anything openly. And like I said, just let it all out.
Okay, well, maybe you can edit what you think is not appropriate.
No, just there's no editing. This is it. So just say it as if you were like nobody is listening.
Well, I will tell you then. Not knowing what was going on, I kid about in the book saying I learned about masturbation quite by accident.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe other kids do, I don't know. And that's how little I knew about what was going on with my body. But when I got into college and my fellow students in the dorm realized he knows nothing. I knew nothing about the female anatomy whatsoever. You could obviously see things were going on, so I noticed things, but as far as what was going on in the lower part of a woman's body, I had no clue. Was it a little bit the same as us, only a little bit different? Were there major I had no idea what was down there. I didn't. When the other kids realized that, I was a laughing stock. It was prior to sex education, but the idea was, haven't you seen pictures? Haven't you read books? Haven't you? No, about the only book that I had read in those days were biblical books or school books that had nothing to do with it. Remember, we were in Alabama in the Bible Belt. There were no books on sex education that were even allowed.
There wasn't porn like there is now. By the way, Gene, you don't know this, and this is going to be new information to you, but I used to work in the adult film industry.
Have we got video?
There is video. I used to work for a company called Digital Playground, and I was the project manager for the company. So I oversaw editing and stuff, but I also was on set. I did behind the scenes camera, and I also wrote screenplays for Pirates and Pirates 2, Stagnetti's Revenge. And they were like high budget adult films that, like, we did a premiere at the Egyptian Theater in Hollywood for the first Pirates. But anyway, I wrote those under the pseudonym Max Massimo. And anyway, the reason I bring this up is because I'm very familiar with the porn industry and where it started and where it is now. And it's kind of insane to me to think about how young people have access to, these very hardcore stuff, and how that's playing out in relationships. And because it's very violent now. Before, it was, the taboo stuff was not mainstream. It was taboo.
Right.
And now it's very violent. It's very it's changed a lot. And so I wonder what would, how you would be now if you had access to that. It might be even, a similar kind of awkwardness, but in a different way. So I don't know. It's an interesting thing to think about.
Well, that's true. And again, the porn industry, not that I watch porn, but what I understand of it, it's very unrealistic. I will say this, the way that I basically discovered it, I ended up with a very solid idea that we should respect women. And so I've always had a very respectful viewpoint of women, and that includes sexually as well. So I think I would be quite disturbed or offended by the porn industry as it is today. I'm blown away that you were part of it. I
don't, it's not something I talk about much unless it comes up naturally. I don't, I have, I don't want to go into it now because it's a long story, but, I have my feelings on it. When I think just generally, I think it's fine what people do as long as they're consenting. And, I think the issue is when money becomes involved, people end up doing things they don't want to do for just to either pay the rent or buy something they think they need, material wise. But I think money causes a lot of problems when it becomes involved in sex, and I've seen the effects of it. But not to get off topic.
I was going to say, back to the story. My roommates and the other people in my dorm decided they were going to it was kind of semi a prank, but also I think well, let's just call it a prank. They got a girl that they knew was pretty promiscuous. They told her about me. And remember, we're in a ministerial college, so this was
This was a
quite
sin.
dramatic, right? This was something this is how bad they felt for me, or how ridiculous they thought I was. So they got this girl to basically ask me out on a date,
Mhm.
and they told me, now she's probably going to want to make out with you, but making out to me was kissing. I'd never gone past kissing and done very
Right.
little of that. So I thought there may be some kissing going on, and that's what they meant by uh, uh, what for me to expect. So we went to a drive-in, which were very prominent in those days. We went to a drive-in, and she was dressed a little for a ministerial college. She was dressed with a very short dress. Those were common in those days. Yeah, even in the school where I went.
Do you remember the movie that you saw?
Uh, oh goodness, no, I don't. I want to
You
say
were
we
so
were near.
focused on what was happening that you don't even probably remember the movie.
I no, I do remember this. It was during the holidays. It was during Christmas. A lot of the students had left and gone, but I stayed there. I didn't go home for Christmas, and so as I recall, it was a Christmas movie, uh, an older Christmas movie. They used to show those during Christmas. They don't do that anymore. So it might
Right.
have been a Wonderful Life or Miracle on 34th Street. It was
Mm.
something like that. It was a very tame movie.
Very romantic.
Well, the idea was, who cares what the movie is, because you're
As
going to
long
get
as
to make out. You've never gotten to make out before. You're going to get to make out. So
right.
anyway, I thought I was a little ready. I was a little apprehensive, but I thought I was ready. Um, and so we weren't there. Literally, I guess it was in previews when she leaned over and started making out with me, and I was just literally terrified. And at that, even at that, like how am I doing? Am I doing awful? Am I embarrassing myself? And then all of a sudden, she took my hand, pulled it up, and put it on her breast. Well, I had never touched her breast, not in my whole life. Never had even thought about the possibility of touching her breast. To be honest with you, I wasn't even familiar with breast because I had never really seen one that wasn't closed. So I didn't know what I was touching. But
It was like that scene in Forrest Gump when Jenny, I think Jenny did the same thing to Forrest.
right. Let's say I was Forrest Gump in this scenario, and rightfully so. Um, but I began to, even at that point, I began to say, now I'm on the precipice here. Do I stop now and do what I feel like my mother would be proud of me for doing? Or do I uh, go over into that realm that I had always wondered about and had always felt like uh, that I should know what was going on? I knew I was about to be there, uh, but I didn't know to what degree. At some point, she took my hand and put it down between up her skirt, and I was totally freaked out. You have to understand. At this point, I'm saying, okay, I don't know what to expect, because remember, I did not know what was down there. I had no idea. I think I guess that's very funny to some people, but what was really funny was when she literally put my hand inside her underpants, and I realized I'm about to see what I've always wondered about. And so I made the decision, I'm going with this. I hope my mother will forgive me someday. But I am, and God as well. They have to understand that I'm going in this direction because I want to know.
So you literally had the angel and the devil on your shoulders at that moment.
I was going through that. Now, people think that that's not true. I was literally going, that's how I had been raised. I was literally going through that dilemma as it was happening in real time. But at some point, I made the decision, I'm going the carnal way instead of the biblical way.
Mhm.
Now, later in life, I thought, well, this wasn't necessarily unbiblical, but at the time,
Right.
that's what I was going through. But then I began to try to, with my hand, discover what I had always wanted to know about. And I I discovered nothing. It was like I wondered for 18 years what was down there, only to discover there is nothing down there. There was nothing there. No matter what I felt, there was nothing there. Um, and so I didn't even know at that point what was I feeling. Uh, and so I began to draw back. I pulled my hand away and left that experience. It left that experience basically not knowing anything more than I had known before the experience, um, and feeling pretty bad about myself. And I did not do anything again for probably another 6 months until some of the guys then at that point said, we need to talk with you. We need to go more in depth about what you should know and about how normal and about how natural it is. And so when I had my first real girlfriend, and understand I was 18 years old, when I had my first real girlfriend, I began to discover things about sex, and I felt better about myself. I'm still angry at my mother, still angry at my religion for having put me through that. Uh,
And
but I will say,
when you say angry, do you mean like shame or guilt?
angry that I was angry that I was put in a dorm with 200 other guys, and it was so obvious how uneducated I was. How do you get to that stage in life as an as a 17-year-old boy and literally know nothing about. Now people think that, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm sure there are others out there who mainly were born and raised in the Bible Belt, who went to school and did not know anything about sex, the female body, uh, what sex entailed, and they had to discover everything on their own after going through probably some of the same dilemma that I went through.
Yeah, and
But
there's probably a
Adrian,
lot more repression and shame around it, and that's also the era too. I mean, what year was that? Like when?
that was in 1970, and I will say this too. Even though I discovered through my girlfriend uh, things about the the female body and sex and what it entailed, we still did not have sex because I still, that part of my religion, I basically was not able to abandon. That you did not have premarital sex, that was a grave sin and something that may affect you for the rest of your life and your relationship with God. And so even then, so what did I do? That person that I knew for a short period of time, and I wanted to have sex. I wanted to know what it was about. So I pushed to get married. I got married when I was 19 years old. And I had barely turned 19. Um,
Was
because
Can I? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
because I wanted, literally, I got married because I wanted to have sex. That is not a reason to get married. And
That's
so
what my question was.
it was a marriage. Pardon my language. It was a marriage from hell. that lasted 13 tumultuous years. 3 children ended up um, out of that marriage. And then we also joked.
And you got to have sex at least 3 times. That's good.
Well, and we had maybe sex 3 times on my honeymoon, but that was so bad. That was so bad that my wife and we didn't get along from the honeymoon on. I think on the way back from the honeymoon, we were discussing should we have done this. But again, religion says your divorce is bad. So I hung up onto that, and we had very little sex. I kid with
that was you were Southern Baptist, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And so I had a good friend named Cairo that I worked with at U.S. Steel in Birmingham, and my wife got pregnant, and I wondered how did my wife get pregnant, because we never have sex. And I realized her due date was 9 months, basically 9 months to the day after my birthday. And that was significant because at some point my wife and I decided to, because she said, I hate for you begging for sex. So we will have sex at least twice a year. You pick a date and I'll pick a date. And if I guarantee that we have sex those 2 dates, then I don't want you begging for sex anymore.
Holy shit! Twice a year? That was the agreement?
Oh, and I felt fortunate. So I kid that I picked my birthday, and she picked Labor Day. So I'm sure there was significance there. But anyway, she got pregnant 3 years into the marriage, and I honestly think she was glad she was pregnant, because that gave her an excuse not to have sex for 9 months. Now I know now she could have had sex while she was pregnant. I did not know that then. So she convinced me you don't have sex when you're pregnant because it could harm the baby. So for that whole 9 months, I didn't have sex. And then it was like, it takes a while for the body to recuperate from the trauma. So we don't want to have sex. So at one point I was talking to my friend Cairo at work, and I'd let him know that I hadn't had sex in almost 2 years. And he said, oh my gosh, well, please tell me you're getting some on the side. And I said, do what? I don't understand what you're asking. He said, are you getting any on the side? And I said, Cairo, it's been so long since I've had any. I didn't even know they had moved it to the side. So very little sex. Well, I was married for 13 years. Through that time, we had sex so little. I don't know how we had 3 children, but we did. And in the book, I'm very open about, and we talk about being open, that about probably 10 years into the marriage, I fell in love with another woman.
But before we get to that, what do you think was the main issue though in that marriage? Was it there was no chemistry? You really didn't know each other? You just thought, I'm going to she said yes, I'm going to get into this and I'm going to get laid. Is that what you were thinking?
That's well, at the time I got married, I understand it wasn't just sex I didn't know about. I didn't know about love. I didn't know what falling in love was. I felt like I loved her, but I didn't know. But I discovered, but maybe that was an excuse. Maybe I was just trying to convince myself of that. But it was not very far in the marriage, and I mean a matter of months, till we realized that we weren't in love. We didn't love each other, and that morphed into not liking each other, and that morphed into basically despising each other. And by the end of the first year, we didn't even hardly want to be in the same room with each other. And there were times throughout those 13 years that she talked about divorce. We separated at one point. I would not give her a divorce because I didn't think you should ever give anybody a divorce. And so that's the kind of marriage it was. And it was tumultuous through the whole time, um, and violent. Now, she has passed away. I would tell my pastor, look, this is the meanest woman I've ever known. She is not just, we are not just incompatible. She's mean to me. She's violent to me. But when she would go to church, she would be the sweetheart. She would be the sweetest thing. So it was hard for anybody to believe that she was mean. But she was. Even her children, she's the meanest person you've ever known when she's not in public. So we finally got divorced, and she's been married 5 times. She was married 5 times before she passed away. So that would let you know how difficult she was in private. And her second husband would actually call me all hours of the night, saying, "What do I do with this woman? I don't know what to do with this woman." And I would say, he would say, "She's mean. And I would say, "I don't know what to tell you. The only thing I can tell you is I would not go through this for 13 years. Be smarter than me. If you cannot get along with her, don't stay with her." And I don't want to recommend, I'm not recommending you divorce her. I'm just saying, don't go through misery for your life, holding on to something that you know is not right. So they got divorced, and she married a 3rd time, and the 3rd time he was killed in an automobile wreck. But he also had called me, but he was pretty mean too. And he
you had 2 husbands call you?
Yes, 2 husbands call me.
Wow.
And I met the third husband I never knew, and they were married for a very, very short period of time. And he was an alcoholic, and basically, probably she was a better person than he was. But the last person I did meet several times, he was Hispanic, and he didn't even speak good English. And I think the reason they got along for the shortest period of time that they did was because he didn't understand half of what she was saying. So, but here's I don't know, it's not funny, it's probably tragic. He left, went back to Mexico, did not say goodbye. They had been married maybe 2 years, maybe 3. He went back to Mexico, did not leave her a note, did not say goodbye. He just abandoned her, and she's never seen him again. And so that was probably 3 or 4 years before she had a heart attack and passed away. I will say this, we became friends, my first wife and I. She was an amazing person, and that she decided after her 3rd husband died that she was wanted to be a nurse. She was in her early 40s. She went to nursing school. She became an RN and then an LPN, or LPN and then an RN. Yeah, I think that's how it goes. And so she had finished and finally had a really good job, and was ready to retire. And she passed away like 2 or 3 weeks before she had to retire. But we had become very good friends over the years. And
why do you think that is?
I don't know. I think we set aside, we shared 3 children. And we kind of set aside that when you're not living with the person, the areas in which you disagree are not as important. And I think we settled on the areas that we did agree on, basically involving our children. She was supportive when I had my stroke. She seemed to be concerned about it. It's funny, when I married Darlene, and you know Darlene, she's like 16 years younger than me. And so I felt like this is going to be a challenge. and so I was really focused on my marriage. We moved to Las Vegas basically to get away from my children in Alabama, who were just and her, who were just constantly on me for this or that, and that bothered her because she was very young, and uh, my kids would move in with us for a period of time, and they were not that much younger than Darla was, and so um, we moved to Las Vegas to get away from that, and then they all of a sudden moved out there, including my first wife. Actually moved in our house for several months, maybe almost a year, if you can believe it. And so um, then my wife said, no, this isn't going to do. So I'm moving. You can move with me if you want to. So we moved away into another house. And then we finally moved back to North Carolina. And then they moved there. And then we moved to California. And they moved there. It's like everywhere
They
we
were like
moved.
stalking you.
Well, I realized that at some point or another, they gained respect for me. So what was a hatred for years, I think became respect. I think she valued my opinion. Definitely thought we ought to all be in an area where the kids were so that we could basically be there for them. Uh, and so at some point, even Darla, my wife, became, uh, we resolved that that was going to be the case. And even though it got on our nerves on occasion, uh, so I think she became a friend somewhere along the way. Not that we weren't the best of friends. She definitely was still mean. Uh, when things didn't go out of her way sometimes, that meanness would come out. Um, but she really valued Darla's opinion, so she would never do that. It's like she used to be in church, where you really couldn't see the mean side of her. Um, she tried to be on her best behavior when Darla was around. But Darla did overhear some conversations on the phone, and she would say, "Oh my goodness, she's mean," and she said, "Yes, she's mean." So that part of her stayed with her. So she died a mean woman, but I think she was a good woman too. I don't know if that makes sense.
No. I mean, it does, and that's one of the things that I find beautiful about Eugene is that you rarely, I don't think I've ever heard you say anything judgmental about anybody. And I think that my feeling that comes from your faith, um, and your, accepting of everyone, love thy neighbor. Uh, I feel like that, that your faith informs how you interact with other uh, living beings, and especially in your relationship. But I want to go back just a little bit because there's a couple things in your book that I remember that are important, but they're really interesting. I remember one story where I think you're like watching a woman that you're interested in like in like the bushes or something like that, and then they catch you. Can you
Well,
talk about that?
this is the woman that I fell in love with. Um, she was also.
Set the
I'll
stage
go
a little
back.
bit. How old were you?
I was going to say well, at this point I was probably 27, something like that. Um, I had been married, I guess by then about 8 years, uh, and I was an actual, basically an advisor at church. And she came to me for, she actually, our pastor at the church said, you need to go talk with Gene. She was having trouble with her husband. And in fact, he had had several affairs and she was trying to stick it out. And so I think our pastor thought, well, Gene knows about sticking it out. Why don't you go talk to Gene? But that discussion evolved pretty quickly, I would say, into an affection on both of our parts. Um, and so she had separated from her husband while she was trying to work this out. And I've always said, when I get to heaven, this is one thing. Uh, they're going to meet me at the gate and say, we're going to let you in, but nobody up here is really happy about it. I think that I will get reprimanded for this because
St. Peter's going to have some things to say about that.
Oh yeah, she came to me for marital advice at church, and instead we ended up having a relationship. So we had been having this relationship for about a year or so, and she was still torn about, do I go back to my husband and give him another chance, or do I separate from him permanently and you and I talk? The funny thing about this was that my current wife and I had talked about it, and she knew I was having this relationship. She hardly cared at all because, again, we did not like each other, and we assumed we were just staying together at the point for the sake of the children, which is kind of prevalent in the Southeast. People will stay together when they know they shouldn't, just for the sake of the children. Well, we were in that point. And so this girl decided, look, we need to back off. I don't want people to know about, and nobody knew about our relationship. It was very private, very secretive.
Now, this was at the end of your first marriage, right? When this was all happening?
It was probably a couple of years before the end of my first marriage.
Okay.
So I did not accept that. I wanted to be open. I wanted to have it. I wanted her to marry me. I wanted us divorced. I wanted us to be together. She was more pragmatic about it. She was more, I still haven't decided if I'm going back to my husband. Obviously, pressures at church are you should stay married, and so she felt that pressure. So all of a sudden, she was like, we need to not let anybody know about this. And so she played softball. She was a very good softball player. And so I knew her schedule. I knew when she was playing, but she would not allow me to go to the games because she said that would be too obvious. Why is he at this game? And maybe she felt people suspected something anyway. And so I kind of scouted out where she played softball. I realized I could park my car about probably a quarter of a mile from the ballpark, walk through the woods, and I could stand on the hill and see the ballpark, and I could watch her play. That's how much I was infatuated with this girl. Just to watch her play ball was a thrill to me. And so I did scout out a place. I went and parked a car. I borrowed my dad's car because I didn't want anybody to see my car there. I parked in the edge of the woods, and I walked through the woods and got on the edge of the hill.
Let this finish ringing. It's my office phone.
Problem.
Sorry about that. Yeah,
That's okay.
Didn't turn that off. Sorry about that.
I recognize the ring. But anyway, I walked through the woods and got on the edge of the hill. I carried my binoculars so I could, see her up close. And I was up on the top of the hill with these binoculars watching her play. Just thrilled to death to be able to do it. But I was focused on her, and my binoculars were focused on her. And it wasn't right up against the ballpark. I was probably 50 yards away. But I could see her well with my binoculars, and I didn't realize that the people in the stands, some of them had seen me up on that hill with my binoculars watching things, and all of a sudden it was like, what's this man doing? Who is he looking at? Why is he up there with binoculars? And all of a sudden they started yelling and pointing, and so then I shifted my binoculars and could see there were a lot of people looking at me and pointing at me up on the hill. And then all of a sudden, some of them were running towards me. And I realized they thought I was a pervert of some kind. So I turned and I ran as hard as I could. Now, by this time, it was nighttime. When I first started coming through to the ballpark, it was daylight and I could see coming through the woods. But now it had turned dark. I brought a flashlight with me just in case, but in running as from the area as quick as I did, I left my flashlight there on the ground. And so I was running in the dark just as hard as I could to get away from these people. And I fell into what I didn't know what it was. I thought it was a beehive. What it was a ditch, a pretty deep ditch with thorns. It had thorn bushes. It was just solid thorn bushes. And so I just fell into that bush, and it was excruciating. It was the worst pain you could ever feel. But I finally dug myself out of there, and I think fortunately I was down in the hole, and they couldn't find me, so they finally left. I finally dug myself out of there, and when I got home and got in front of a mirror, I just literally looked like I'd been put through a meat grinder.
What did your wife say?
From head to toe. It's funny. She thought it was funny. Now, remember, she had no issue with me being in love with somebody else.
Right.
And
so it was, she knew about it.
Oh, yeah, she knew about it. Yeah, she absolutely knew about it. And I think at that point, we'd already decided, well, we're going to get a divorce at some point. So to her, it was funny, but I write about it in the book. I don't know how funny it was. It's probably tragic when you look at it from some angle, but there were a lot of things throughout that relationship and my growing up and my first relationship that would be tragic to most people. But it is so unnatural, the things that I went through, that it's hard for people to look at and think, was this real, or are you just making this up? So it's unusual that I'm as normal as I am. I think Darla made me normal. She pretty well quickly said, we'll stay together. We will have a really wonderful relationship, but there's some things about you that you need to change or get over. And she pretty well directed me through that.
What were some of the things that needed to change?
Well, I was still, to be honest with you, when Darla and I met, I hired Darla. She walked into my office to get a job. I hired her. We pretty well, I don't know, I tell it differently than she does. But I will say we pretty well became attached to each other pretty quickly.
But it should be noted that I think in the beginning you were hesitant about it, right?
I was still in love. You gotta understand, I was still in love, and the girl that I was in love with finally said, "It's over. I don't want you anymore. I want something else." She went back to her first husband, and I was obsessed with her, but somewhere the obsession kind of morphed into stalking, and I actually stalked her for a while. And I had decided, because she finally said, you know what, am I going to have to get a restraining order? It got that bad. And so I literally kind of got with her friends and told some bad stories about her just to get back at her. So I will, one of the other things that I will probably pay for. But when then Darla came along, and we began to have a relationship, and that was good. But honestly, I was still in love with the other girl. And that's not something that just went away that quickly. So Darla dealt with that for several years, and bless her heart, we finally separated. I don't know if Darla told you about this. Probably for about 6 months. That was after I had a daughter. My daughter was 5 years old. So 6 years into the marriage, I was still struggling. Would talk about the other girl, would refer to her and make comparisons. And so Darla then said, after we were separated, I'm going to give you another chance, one more chance. But when we get together again, I never want to hear about these other things. And I want us to be your focus, and I want me to be your focus. And I felt so bad about almost having lost her. And I realized what I would have lost if I had lost her. That I literally made a drastic change at that point. Um, and darling, I've had a really wonderful relationship since then. I mean, I had a stroke. She's 16 years younger than me. I had a stroke, and she was still only 38 years old. All of a sudden, she's not only had married an older man, but now she's going to be the caregiver for an older man. And I think most women would have hightailed it. I really do. I think it's miraculous almost that she hung in there and stayed with me um, through severe diabetes, through severe health problems, through a second stroke and a heart attack, as you know. Um, and with each one of these episodes, uh, I needed more care, uh, and that was more and more responsibility on her. And I think over the 15 years since I've had the stroke, that I could count on one hand how many times she's complained, and the things that she has to do as a caregiver. I don't know. Uh, you can leave it to your imagination. But somebody who's basically disabled like I am, the things that she has to do to be a caregiver uh, is amazing that she has stayed. But not only that she has stayed, but that she rarely complains. So
Right. For those listening that don't know, you are paralyzed on your left side.
Yes.
So you're a power chair user. So
yes, I've been in a power chair for most of that 15 years.
Right. Right. Well, that is amazing and beautiful. The love and devotion there. What was it about the woman that you were obsessed with? What was it about her that you it seemed like it was almost an addiction. What was it?
Well, I'll say this. Remember when I got married, it wasn't love. So there was no love there. There was no mutual affection whatsoever. So I had never experienced that. So by the time now I'm 26 years old, when I first fell in love with this girl, by the time I'm 26 years old, I'm realizing, oh, this is what love is. This is what falling in love is. And I became and she was a beautiful girl too. And so I was infatuated with her anyway. But I became very addicted to being in love with somebody who was in love with you. And that was the greatest. I'm sure it still would be. I'm sure it still is for anyone. If you are magically in love with somebody who's magically in love with you, it's the most incredible thing ever. And I had never experienced that before. And even though the mutual part of that only lasted for a couple of years before she decided, that this is what she feels like is right. She felt like it was ethically wrong, morally wrong, and that she was going another direction. I was not ready to do that. I was not ready to let go of that feeling, and I felt like if I persist and I don't let go, that somewhere along the way she'll come to her senses and realize she doesn't want to let it go either. Now I will tell you this: she finally divorced him, and she had been married 3 times since then. And so I'm not the only confused person in this world, I know. And I look at people and I want to tell her, we're still friends. We're friends now. We went several decades without talking to each other. And then all of a sudden, because I'm still good friends with her sister, and I write about this in the book. her sister and I are best friends, so I still knew of her and what was going on with her in her life, but we didn't talk. But we became friends again, and so we're friends now. And I tell her, you probably made the biggest mistake of your life when you didn't keep me, when you let me go. That's probably wrong. I would have never met Darla. I would have never had my two wonderful children that I have now with Darla, who are really great people. I'm telling you. And so I'm glad it happened the way it did. But still, I think when you are, I call it magically in love with somebody, when you are 100% committed to that person, that it can't be bad. Now, I'm probably wrong about that. There were definitely, I look back and think, there were things wrong with that. She was married. I was married. Even though she had a bad marriage and I had a bad marriage, did that give me the right to basically turn my back on what my mother would have told me to do and go headstrong into that relationship? Um, but, things, I am one that truly believes things happen for a reason. Things work themselves out the way they do for a reason. And if you can look back on it and say, we're in a good place now, and I'm in a wonderful place now, as you know, that things ended up working out the way they should. I say that about you. We talked for a long time, and I would say, hey, Brian, are you ever going to um, seek out a relationship again? And you would say, I don't know. I doubt it. I don't think so. And I know that I was so pleased when you did. And I can tell you now that I feel like that's something that uh, is so positive in your life that happened. That it's and now it's not bad to need somebody else. It's not bad to uh, have them help you with the things that you're going through, but you also have to realize that you're helping her too. Your relationship with her is a positive thing for her. And so I think that about Darla, and I think I'm good for Darla. I'm supportive of Darla. I may be more of a father figure, I don't know, uh, but we get along well, and she listens to me. Now I pretty well do what she tells me to do, but she does listen to me, and so I think maybe everything that I went through from the time I was 5 years old to the time that I uh, decided that I'm going to focus on Darla and no one else. I think all of those things may have made me into the person that I am, that Darla can now respect and love. I don't know. Uh, but I can tell you now, it was an unusual life. I've gone through things that a lot of people didn't. On the other end of that, I've traveled all over this country. I've spoken to crowds ranging from 50 to 1,500 um, about my life and the things that I've gone through with. And so I think some of them, I was able to write the book. Some of the things that I had to say, I can see it in people's eyes, they do identify with. Uh, they want to nod their head like, yeah, I have been there. And maybe me being able to say, work your way through it. Uh, Hold on to the things that are positive for you to hold on to. Um, Focus on those things. You can focus on the negative. Right now, we're going through this election, and I told Darla, if I get through this election without having a bleeding ulcer, I'll be lucky, because those things really they weigh on me. But I can also focus on the positive things, and I can honestly say, no matter how this election ends up, that I feel like we'll work our way through it. We will be okay. Um, we may be going in different direction depending on who wins, but uh, we'll be okay. And as individuals, if we focus on the positive things, and I think I've been able to do that, and I think that's why I'm able to be the person I am now.
So you have a hopeful, optimistic view of whatever the outcome may be of this election, which is going to be on Tuesday. So
Right. You know what I do. I have very. I don't know if they are strict political views, but I'm very political in nature. Um, and then that you've invited me to talk about anything, I will tell you this. I think that our government was initially founded on the idea that we are all equal, so that all of our opinions matter. What we feel matters. So I am liberal in nature, and that's odd to tell you. I was born and raised a devout Christian. My mother was, and now I'm liberal. But I'm more liberal because I think we should, in all things, be supportive of those less fortunate, those who have great needs, and through their best efforts have not been able to overcome the mountains that they face. And that is not just in our country, but in other countries. And those who look for us for some help to get them out of not only devastating situations, but violently dangerous situations. And so I am very liberal in nature, in that I feel like all of our focus should be on those who need our help. Um, and I think the government should be unashamedly able to do that. Now, I realize there are many who don't believe that. And so I've noticed that many of the current conservative, I guess their stance is based on the abortions. And we all have different ideas of abortion and how that relates to our daily lives and how we feel about others. But I feel like that half of the country who feels one way, or more than half the country, their opinions matter just as much as anyone. So when you have a 6-3 court that leans towards one direction, in fact, to the minority of the country, and they make their decisions based on what I feel like are political views, or even religious views, that you are discounting well over half of the country and how they feel and what they believe. And when you carry that even to a further point where you say people who believe that way are evil, then all of a sudden we get such a divide between the 2 points of views that is so divisive and so far apart that I feel like it looks like it'll be hard to overcome. But I do know this, no matter what the outcome of the election, in that well over half of the country believe in a certain way, we're not going to quit. The next 4 years may be difficult, but at some point, this country is going to say, we've gone too far in one direction. We need to come back a little bit. And the country as a whole will work towards it. I think you're seeing that in this election now. So,
one of the things that I admire about you is your ability to talk to others and invite them and create a very inviting, warm atmosphere of hospitality and conviviality. Now, and I think that comes through most apparent in your storytelling. Can you talk about how you went on the journey to, I mean, you really are a storyteller at heart, and that And I know you were in sales, but essentially you were using storytelling as a tool for your sales, because you were in cable and satellite and all that for sales, for those of you listening and watching. So where did that come from? The story, the ability to tell stories.
That actually, at some point, I came to the realization as I spoke to crowds, and I was invited to speak to a lot of groups. And the more I did, the more. And remember, I was a minister early on. So I spoke to a lot of people, even at an early age. I took speech in college. That was one of my minors in college. And so I enjoyed giving speeches. And I think I can remember my speech teacher, Miss West, back in college, would tell me, your ability to tell stories will make you a good speaker. So rather than just giving statistics or talking about facts or whatnot, if you tell stories to make your point, people will listen to the stories. They may not agree with your point, but they would listen to your stories. And I also realized that if you inject humor into those stories, so that once people laugh, once they laugh, they're listening to that story. You can't tell a humorous story and somebody just sit there and stare at you. If they laugh, they're listening to the story. So I did not make up stories. I probably exaggerated some of the, you know, the things that I told in the story. So I did that to make them more humorous, or to make them more, I guess, relatable. But I didn't make up any of the stories. And so, again, I traveled throughout the country. I met thousands of people. I had an unusual upbringing. All of those lent themselves to stories. I met a lot of people who told me stories then. And one thing, when you tell stories, people want to tell you stories. And so some of those stories I held on to and repeated. So I think the storytelling um, I loved making people laugh. I always thought I probably could have been a stand-up comedian. You know, my daughter does stand up in New York. And so she says she got that from me. But I love making people laugh. I enjoyed making people emotional. Uh, so all of my stories are not humorous. Some of them are quite emotional, and some of those were related to me by other people. And so, and I took ferocious notes. When somebody told me a story, I would write a note about it. That's why I was able to write the book the way I did and tell the stories that I did. So I met some amazing people along the way who had great stories and wonderful stories. So I think I told stories as much as I did and as often as I did, because I enjoyed them. I enjoyed the story. Some of the stories, even if I tell them now, will make me cry. So it's not that I enjoyed making people cry. It's that when I saw them tear up or cry openly, that I knew my story had hit the mark that I had intended it to do.
Was there somebody in your life that was kind of a mentor in storytelling?
To be honest with you, I almost became my own mentor. I knew some pastors who, in their sermons, would tell stories, and I was always very, very taken with certain pastors who I could just listen to preach for forever. Still could, and they're still very good friends. And so there was I think, Brian, I just had so many stories to tell that I didn't have any one mentor. I began to realize as I heard stories throughout the country that these are great stories. I think at some point I told my wife, maybe I'll write another book and just tell these are the stories that I've been told. That range from very funny, very humorous, to tragic, to very emotional. And so I think the stories themselves, it might not make sense. The stories themselves became my mentor, maybe.
That's beautiful. So how are you doing on time? Are you okay?
I'm fine, but it's 12:30, and I've enjoyed this. I really have.
Well, could you, before we depart, could you tell a story that means a lot to you and that that really kind of resonates with you all the time, that you think about a lot?
You know what, Brian? There are several. The one that still gets me emotional, and may at this point. I was dealing with a lot of reps. I've had several thousand reps over the years that I have mentored and trained and worked with hand in hand. And one thing about, and they were all salespeople. One thing about salespeople that many salespeople are not honest. They will do most anything to make a sale. It's their living. They're trying to earn an income. And if they think I can earn a better income by not telling the truth about the product I'm selling, which I was in the telecommunications industry. So they sold cable for the most part. If you buy this package, you're going to have all of these channels and you can afford it. And this is actually a better deal. You can buy it cheaper, but you're going to end up wishing you hadn't, and things like that. So they would oversell people packages, big packages that they knew at the time that they did it, they could not afford, that this person could not afford. And somewhere along the way, this would cause them a financial hardship. But they would do it anyway. Knowing this, they would do it anyway because it meant more money to them. And that had always bothered me, and I talked about it a lot. And so we had a project going in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And we were talking about this, and the gentleman told a story there that he was a salesperson. He had always done that. He had always oversold when he knew it wasn't really ethical to do. Sometimes people couldn't afford cable at all. They just couldn't afford it. A small package or big package. And so they would go in and they would convince that person, you can afford this. And he was like that. And he had a son that would periodically ride with him when he went out in the field. And the son, it was probably, I recall, and I have to look at my notes again or read the book again, and was in his early teens. Late teens or early 20s. And this gentleman was cutting grass. He had an old lawnmower that had been kind of broken up in places. And he hit a rock, and the rock, while he was cutting grass, he hit a rock, and the rock hit a part of the lawnmower and broke off that blade, a part of the blade, and the blade hit his son in the head. Oh. The son had severe brain trauma, and after a while, he was able to at least almost non-verbally communicate. So he would write a lot of his notes, and he was able to tell his dad things or communicate with dad basically by writing notes, and his father would respond. So he finally got to where he felt like he could go out with his father again. And he went in with his father, who made this type of sale to where he knew, and the son sat and watched him do that. The son knew this isn't right. This is wrong. You should not have done this. These people can't afford what you just sold them. This is going to be a problem for them in the future. And they've got children. They're going to worry about feeding and clothing their children, and you're selling them cable that you can't afford. He saw that, but he couldn't vocalize it. When he got back to the car, his father could tell something was wrong, and he said, you know what's wrong? What's your problem? And the son wrote down on a piece of paper, you should be ashamed of what you just did. I'm ashamed of you as your son, and you should not have done that. These people could not afford it. He wrote it in, I guess, so many words. The father felt so bad about it that he went back in the house and he told them, I should not have done this. You can't afford this. This is going to cause you problems. At least you should buy a smaller package, but I suggest you not buy anything. And the father kept that note, and he kept it with him from then on. He said, I became a different salesperson. And the son finally passed away at a very young age. I want to say 4 or 5 years after that. And when the father went to the funeral, he talked about it, and he had the note, and he held up the note. So I invited him to come and speak to our group about this. And maybe if you tell this story, you're going to get across to these reps what I maybe had not been able to do. And he brought that note with him. To me, that's still very, very an emotional, but a lesson that is almost impossible for some people to learn. That just through this boy's simple writing of a note could have affected his father's life. And I think many other people since then, people who have even read my book have commented on it, but certainly people who heard him speak. It changed the way, at least temporarily, of the way they looked at the people they were dealing with. And I should never, what I should do in life is help people not do anything that will in some way make their life more difficult. And I think things like that I've gone through have affected the way that I look at other people who have hold on, that was a business partner. And so people who have other, thoughts about things than I do, different points of views, even if they're extreme in another direction, that I feel like, what, I need to treat everyone with respect as much as I can muster. And if I don't respect them, I should just basically keep that to myself. I think if everybody did that on social media, what a different venue social media would be. But I can't expect that of people, and I can't brag on myself for feeling that way myself. It's just, I can tell you these things have affected me and the way that I feel like I should treat people and empathy that I should have for people who even could be perceived enemies. So maybe that comes across.
It does. That's the one thing that I think about. One of the things of going to work every day when we were working together, I was just so happy when you were there because you were so funny, so empathetic, and just it was wonderful to be within your presence, and you made everyone around you feel at ease and comfortable. And that's a beautiful gift to have, especially when people have very different views about, or worldviews about, this existence that we're all living through. And yes, go ahead.
I was going to say, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about the work that you are doing now. You just went down to LA, and then tell us about that.
Right. Well, I get, because I was, excuse me, Brian, because I was uh, in the major industry for years, I pretty well known throughout the country for being able to recruit people. I still have a lot of reps that call on me. So a lot of businesses um, who are having some kind of event or a product or something they want to put forward and they need reps will call me to get me to recruit for them or reach out to some of these people. So I have signed several contracts, one with the city of LA, and I was doing another project with them where they're giving away free insulation for addicts in the city of LA. And I had reps doing that until COVID came along, and they've kind of sidelined that. But then I got a call from the city saying they had a project where they wanted to reach out. Uh, so on the stimulus, where everybody got their $1,200 check, um, you had to have an ID of some sort, and they realized people on Skid Row didn't. Most of them did not have the ID, and they could not get it. And there's still millions of dollars available for that first stimulus that was never claimed, and a lot of these people did not know they could. So there was an accumulation of people there, and I was invited to come down there and get some reps to go in there and uh, they were making it available to the stimulus checks to those that did not have ID and those that had other reasons that they were not able to apply for the stimulus on their own or online. Uh, so I agreed to go down there. Uh,
Now, when you say
I
down
had
there,
never
are
been
you
to
talking about like
of Skid
downtown
Row.
LA, where the tents?
Yes,
Yeah,
Skid Row in LA, right?
yeah.
My assumption was there was maybe 100 tents on an alleyway there. I thought of Skid Row as one little street. I had no idea. So when I got down there, I realized it was it was actually a small city with blocks upon blocks of just tents upon tents upon tents. Thousands, I mean, literally thousands of people who lived there in tents. Uh, and what was worse, I pretty quickly found out that there were probably thousands who did not have tents, and they just slept on the street. They slept on the sidewalks.
I remember seeing an article that there was like 14,000 families a month, like were going without housing.
Right, and a lot of that's throughout LA, and we have left Skid Row and are trying to reach out to the other people in the area that might be homeless or might not have ID and we found out there are not tent cities, but there are tents all over the place. There are people who are living uh, on the streets. A lot of them, the shelters are full. So you have a shelter that might house 400 people. You have to be there at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and stand in line to get a bed. So, and some of them are families. One of the things tragic about Skid Row is no children are allowed. So there are a lot of those people that live on Skid Row who had small children. Uh, and those small children are living elsewhere because they could not afford to take care of them. So there are a lot of tragic things about Skid Row. But throughout the city, we're finding that out now. And I've got reps out there basically seeking people out who may need this help. And you can imagine what a difference to a person who lived like that or on Skid Row to get $1,200. And what a difference that would make. And if they get the first one, if they have a second one, they'll automatically get that. These are life-changing things to people that it may be temporary, but it may also get them be the thing that vaults them over this mountain, these obstacles that they're facing. So we're doing that now, and that's very, very, very rewarding. It ends on November the 21st. If they haven't signed up by then, then they're not going to extend it past then. So
Was there a story that moved you that you could share from your time down there?
um, I would say not a specific story. Uh, the I think the things that I learned, one of the things that I learned is probably just in those blocks. And we went up and down those blocks, and there was very few people that we didn't talk to somewhere along the way. There are two things. One, how well the city takes care of them. They will, it makes it a little less tragic. They will come through several times a day with food in trucks. They will stop and hand out boxes of food. The missions serve food. One day when I was there, the missions were giving away tennis shoes. So you'll notice after that, a lot of the people walking around had new shoes on. So that's one thing that is a positive aspect to this. They're as well taken care. There are showers and bathrooms on every other block where these people, and they're kept clean, where these people can go in and out, and they're monitored by personnel. There are security on every block, on every corner that go up and down these blocks and make sure everything is safe. Now they tell you, come dark, you need to get out of there because things change at dark. And some of these people may turn on themselves because they're so needy. They need things, and if they think by robbing or whatnot to get the things they need. But while we were there, as many people as I know had needs, not once was I ever asked for a handout. Not once did I ever see a sign that said that was begging for money. And they seemed to be resolved to the situation they were in, and almost I guess they were comfortable there. I don't know. I could not tell. Go ahead.
It made me think, Gandhi said that poverty is the greatest form of violence.
Well, that is tragic. To me, the things that they had decided they were okay with were things that I could never imagine anybody being okay with. And they had resolved themselves to the fact that this is my lot in life, and I might as well make the best of it. I would see people would come up to our tables every day, and they obviously had mental health issues. There are so many mental health issues there that it's heartbreaking. One thing they don't have is psychiatrists down there helping these people with mental health issues, and so they would come up to our tables every day and say, "Did I do this already?" It's the same people wearing the same clothes. And so I would realize, how are you okay with this? And I would hear them talking to others, and they basically all knew each other. And somebody would tell me, "Oh, he's a little crazy." So they basically had learned how to deal with each other's mental issues. And so where that's headed long term, I don't know. But it's heartbreaking. At the same time, it's amazing. And I left basically a little bit different person for having been down there. And I was only there 2 weeks. But
what do you think changed in you?
Just that. I've always felt like we really, really need to do what we can to help those less fortunate. I still believe that. But I've always had in mind those that were less fortunate were miserable. They were miserable people because they had nothing. Their life had turned on them. Some of these people had lived there for decades in that same tent. Some of them had put tents together and lived in almost small houses because they had so many tents that were joined together. So I left realizing that everybody who is really less fortunate than me may well be happier than me. Um, and how less fortunate can you be than what I saw there? And yet I saw people who were came to us and they were in good moods. They were happy. They would joke around. They would kid with us, and then go back to their tent. Um, that to me was amazing. That changed my thinking on that aspect. That all people less fortunate must be miserable because they had nothing, and I realized that's not always true.
I think you can relate to this. The intake, where we work at the Independent Living Center. There's a part where the question you have to ask: are you at risk of homelessness?
Right.
And it's interesting how everybody responds. I always think the question is, unless one is a billionaire, the answer is always yes. I am risk at home for homelessness. So, it's one tragedy and one, missing paycheck away from it. You know what I mean?
Well, it absolutely is, and we met a lot of people at Freed who were who had just become homeless, and there was not only sadness there, but there was fear there. They were afraid of what's to become of me, um, and I think those people uh, reflected how I felt and reinforced how I felt about people who are homeless, that they're miserable, that they are scared, that they are wondering what's to become of me. And so most of the people we dealt with Freed felt that way. We also knew people who had been homeless for years. And when you would try to get them a place to live, maybe even be successful, they basically ended up letting you know, I'm more comfortable being homeless than I am living in a home. So um, I don't know. I think between Freed and then the people I've met recently, I've realized there's such a wide range of poverty and how people react to it uh, that I'm not in a position to make a judgment anymore.
I guess it's a matter of if one's dignity is intact throughout whatever happens. That's extremely important.
And you know what, Brian? I thought of that too, and we talked about it with some of the reps I had down there. A lot of these people seem happy, but I think almost all of them have given up their dignity. They've lost their dignity. And somewhere along the way, they just said, well, the heck with it. And my dignity. My thing now is to survive. My thing now is to do not go hungry. Um, and all of these people had family, and that's a tragic thing. Everybody there had sons and daughters, or mothers and fathers. Uh, Another thing that I did not mention, probably the average age of the people on Skid Row, again, there are thousands, are in their 60s. I met people in their 80s walking there, up and down, living homeless in their 80s. But I also met people in their early 20s that had already given up and had said, "This is my lot in life." Um, and as wide of a range as that was also the range of people who had not only given into that, but were comfortable with it, that were almost happy with it. Yeah, people may have been lonely their whole life, and one thing they are not on Skid Row is lonely. There are people there that are shoulder to shoulder with them, tent to tent with them. Somewhere along the way, there are people who identify with them and are friends with them. So they may have more friends now living in that community than they ever had in life, and that may make them happy. Um, and so the range of things being tragic and the things being amazing uh, is something that basically I came out of it realizing I could not make a judgment on anybody. That I think people who judge people are living in a foolish world, because it's hard to judge somebody when you don't know their story, when you don't know what led them to the place they're in now, or the opinions they have now. So why judge them? I think you're able to judge yourself to some point, but I don't even judge my children. As you know, my daughter is gay, and I'm as proud of her as I could possibly be. And my Christian friends would tell me that's not even scriptural, and I would say, I reject that and your ability to judge, and I don't think the scriptures give us the ability to judge. And I may be wrong about all this. Like I say, when I get to heaven, God may be shaking his finger at me real quick. But I think judging is one of the worst things we could do as human beings to the people around us. And that's about all social media is now. And when you look at that, is people judging other people. And I think that's about as wrong as it can be. I think everything that I've come through, from the time that I was young to this past 2 weeks when I was working in LA, has led me to that point. Don't feel free just to judge people. If I had a motto in life, that would be it.
Well, thank you, Gene. I can feel your love and your empathy and compassion for other human beings, and your sense of humor has always made me feel at ease, and I appreciate you in my life, and thank you. And so how can people find you?
Well, if they want to read my book, it's on Amazon, Kindle. You can go on there. It's I think the paperback is not but $6 or something like that, and I actually have made it free to people who don't want to pay anything. So you can actually, get it for free. So that option is there.
And it's Diagnosis Screwed Up is the title.
Yes.
So Gene Landreth, Diagnosis Screwed Up, everybody. And you can also see him on YouTube telling stories. I know that you uploaded a video maybe 2 years ago of a story about your mother. And
Yes.
What is the title of that?
Well, I don't think it had a title, but if you pull my name up on YouTube, it'll pop up. It's basically about the days before my mother died and the months before it and what led up to that. And how I think that reflects on mothers altogether. It was done right at Mother's Day a couple of years ago. I don't get proud of things. I'm proud of that video, and that I felt like it shows the connection I still have with my mother. And even though I've kind of wandered away from her strict views on spirituality, and how dominant they should be in one's life, I still loved her and thought she was one of the best mothers ever. And so I did that video in her honor, and I feel like that it reflected what most mothers are. So no matter what your mother's religious views are, I think it boils down to they love their children and how much they love their children and the lengths they would go to for their children. And that's what the video is about. So I would enjoy anybody going in and watching that video.
Thank you, Gene. So everybody, this is Gene Landreth, the author of Diagnosis Screwed Up. And you can see him on YouTube. Just, search his name, Gene Landreth. Thank you so much, Gene. It was an honor and a pleasure to have you here. And I always enjoy hearing your stories, and I appreciate you.
Well, thank you so much, Brian. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you. Now we have an awkward ending. This is always how it goes. So I have to turn off the recording. So let me know when it's off. And oops, I have to turn. Oops, I did something here. Hold on 1 second.
Still up there.